Hello, everybody. My name is Colin Morris. I'm the Communications Officer for MinSouth organization, a local group within the IM3. And in conjunction with Women in Mining, we have arranged for a woman from an Indigenous lady from Saskatchewan to give a talk entitled Diversity in Mining at an Indigenous female's perspective. And from that, I would like to hand this over to Amon from Women in Mining.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, and welcome everybody. So yes, my name is Amon Shandell, and I'm actually head of events at Women in Mining UK. And Colin asked us a few months ago to join up for this very special event, which is, yes, hosted by MinSouth for their SNAP meeting. Supported by us, Women in Mining UK, on diversity in mining and Indigenous females perspective. But before we officially start, let's just run through a few housekeeping points to make this a pleasant event. So please note, we are recording today's event and it will be available for playback on both the MinSouth website and the WIM UK YouTube channel. So do look out for it. And if you could be so kind to keep your mics on mute during the presentation, that would be greatly appreciated. But feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation via the chat button, and you'll see it at the top of your screen, top right-hand corner. And yes, my big thanks to Colin from MinSouth, who has organized today's event, and it gives me great pleasure now to introduce you to Carrie Lenovitz, a First Nations woman from the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation in northern Saskatchewan. A Jill of all trades, Carrie has 20 years of experience in the mining industry and currently runs her own consulting company. In 2018, Carrie started Diamonds in the Rough. You may have heard of them, a non-profit dedicated to bringing awareness to diversity, equity, and inclusion of women in the mining industry, using mine rescue as a vehicle to do so. That year, she took the first all-female team to participate in an international competition in Russia, a country where it's still illegal for women to work underground. Her plan for DITR includes the training of an all-female Indigenous mine rescue team that will compete at a national level, for they are significantly underrepresented in this industry, and visibility is needed to encourage more Indigenous men and women to seek out these non-traditional mining roles. With a science background and a love for everything emergency response, her life goal is to build these emergency response capacities in communities, industries, and on a personal level for minorities. She seeks to build respectful relationships of understanding between all people so we can succeed together. Carrie, it's a huge pleasure for us to have you here today. It's afternoon for us, but 7 a.m. for you in Saskatchewan. So thank you for joining us and sharing your story with us. And I'd like to hand over to you now.
All right. So I'm going to repeat a couple of the things that she said there. But I am a Cree First Nations woman from the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation in northeastern Saskatchewan. And I'd like to acknowledge that I am on Treaty 10 territory, which are the traditional lands of the Rocky and Woodland Cree here in Saskatchewan. Now, my family stems from a small community called Pelican Arrows, and we're part of the Morasti clan. And if you were from around here, you know it's a very, very big family. Again, I've had several years of experience in the mining industry, graduated from post-secondary education with an environmental toxicology degree in 2006. I always joke that I know how to kill you and not get caught, but don't worry, I'm kind. I also did my master's in disaster and emergency management in 2017. I am also a managing director of a charity where we distribute scholarships and bursaries for post-secondary education. And as I said already, I'm managing director of Diamonds in the Rough, which I will tell you a little bit about in the presentation. And part of my business, I train mine rescue and first aid. I do project management. I develop safety, environmental, and emergency management programs, and also work on fire and life safety program delivery within First Nations communities across Canada. Now, one of the reasons I give such a big display of what my qualifications are, is because of who I am, because of what I look like, and my sex. I've often been challenged as to, well, what do I know anyway? Well, I'm going to tell you. So we're going to go over a few things here. So talk about the women in mining a little bit, Indigenous people in mining, what privilege is, and there's a few definitions that I just want to get out there so people can kind of understand that. The microaggressions, which are often the things that make the workplace a little bit more uninviting. And how we can be that change maker and make sure we have a more inclusive and fair environment for women to work in. And then I'll share a little bit about how to measure success and how we did that in Diamonds in the Rough. Now, women in mining, there's often the question, well, why do we need more women in mining anyway? Why is it important? Well, women make up 75% of the buying decisions in the home. So why shouldn't they be the one bringing home the bacon, first of all? And unfortunately, the statistics vary worldwide, but in general in Canada, it's anywhere between 10 to 15% of the employees within the mining industry are represented by women. And only about 4% of these are women in technical positions. So we have a lot of fly-in, fly-out mining operations, and that 10 to 15% also includes the housekeeping staff, the kitchen staff, of which are predominantly women as well. So when we come to look at women in STEM, we're looking at 4%. Now, statistically, it's shown that a more diverse workforce actually decreases the risk to safety because people are more willing to speak up in a diverse environment. True enough that there is a decrease in downtime due to equipment failure, because when it comes to female equipment operators, women are more likely to address those equipment issues when they occur. And he's a male, he's true from his experience in the underground world. There's also a significant increase within the workplace. There's also an increase in production because of the increased safety and the decrease in downtime, and of course that means an increase in the bottom line. So why wouldn't companies want women in mining? And for all those reasons, why wouldn't we want Indigenous people in mining as well? However, one of the things that we look at in Canada is only 7% of the mining industry employees are Indigenous, and the percentage of female Indigenous employees is unknown. There's not a good statistical representation I can find out there. Now, one thing that people don't often recognize in Canada is that when we are working in mines, we are actually usually working on First Nations traditional lands. And a lot of people don't really realize or recognize that, that there is a respect that needs to be shown there, because there has been, in a lot of cases, some consultation that has occurred where there are agreements formed so that land can be utilized for mineral extraction. Now, one of the important things there too, though, with Indigenous culture, land lies at the heart of social, cultural, spiritual, political, and economic life. So there have been efforts made to ensure employment quotas for local or Indigenous workers, but the outsiders, the people who don't come from that land that mining company is on, they're still disproportionately occupying the highest ranked and paid positions in those companies. Without the training, the entry-level positions carry the least opportunity for advancement and are the default positions for most Northerners in Saskatchewan. So it really maintains the geographic and racially defined hierarchies there. So with all the benefits we see with women in mining and diversity in mining, it is still important that we look at increasing the number of minorities in the mining industry, which in Canada significantly looks at Indigenous peoples as well. Now, there's a lot of people don't understand privilege, and they think, well, if somebody says, I don't think I'm better than anyone else, well, that's not what privilege means. Privilege is basically an advantage or a right possessed by a person or group that is not necessarily an earned advantage. So this doesn't mean that a person or a group of people don't suffer the effects of life's ups and downs. What it just means is that that advantage is unearned, and it's based solely on their identity, whether it's their race, their gender, sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, their country of origin, their language or ability. It's usually something somebody is born with or into. Now, when we talk about inequity, inequity is unfairness or injustice. So when we're looking at that, it's things like lack of access to quality education, income and wealth gaps, inadequate housing or lack of housing. When we look at gender inequity, basically it's those social constructs that result in women and men not being offered fair treatment. When we look at racial inequity, it's often the structural, institutional, and individual constructs that result in unfair treatment. And when I talk about structural, what I'm talking about is the interplay of policies, the practices, the programs of different institutions, which result in unfair outcomes and conditions for people of minorities compared to the predominant culture in that area. And when it comes to racism, of course, that lends into the historical and cultural conditions that pre-existed the industry that's there. Now, an example of that too is students in low-income neighborhoods. They often receive an education that is inferior to students in wealthier areas. And one of the stats I found, basically this inequity in this education results in 37% of the reason for lower math scores in affluent neighborhoods versus lower income neighborhoods. When I'm talking about institutional, what I'm looking at is policies, practices, and procedures that work to benefit the majority. Now, an example of this is maternity leave. Often when we're looking at resumes for hiring practices, that maternity leave, that gap in the resume is often seen as a detriment or a lack of experience, when I'm sure most mothers out there that have taken maternity leave know that they would probably rather go back to work in some cases, because being a stay-at-home mom is a very difficult thing. You're the care provider, you're the chef, you're the house cleaner, you're absolutely everything, and that should count for something. And often it doesn't when people are looking at those hiring practices and they see that gap in the resume. Now, when we're looking at individual or interpersonal, we're looking at that prejudgment, bias, or stereotypes. Often they don't necessarily aren't blatant. There's what we call microaggressions, which I'll get onto right away here, but they can be subtle or they can be outright and explicit. Now, when we look at inequality, basically that's an imbalance. So if we look at the distribution of power, economic resources, and opportunities, when it comes to Indigenous women in mining, there's a lower percentage of Indigenous women in mining compared to males in mining, compared to Indigenous males in mining. It's very underrepresented. Now, the privilege that people have can often lead to that inequity, that unfairness, and result in that imbalance. And that's you can look at somebody who was born to perhaps a middle-class family, raised by two parents, go to a good school in an affluent neighborhood. And then you compare that to somebody who was raised in a single-parent home in a poor part of town, who had to get a job at 13 just to buy the things that her friends had that her parent couldn't afford on their own. Now, in the first example, allowing somebody to live in that affluent neighborhood, I mean, they didn't earn that. They were born into that. They had a well-outfitted school, because they had a better teachers, because it was a more attractive area for people to work, probably a dual income. There's more disposable income to fulfill the needs of their child. The child didn't have to go and get a job after school, so they had more time to spend on schoolwork, to have those extracurricular activities. And basically, they have a nice, well-padded resume before they even leave high school. Now, somebody who was raised in that poor neighborhood, single parent, they might not be able to participate in all those after school activities. They might not be able to volunteer. They don't have that resume that's well padded. And when they come out of high school, they don't have the scholarship opportunities that somebody else might have had. And their education, their post-secondary education might be delayed until later in life. And if your post-secondary education is delayed later in life compared to the first example, your earning potential over the course of your working years is statistically less. So privilege is a situation basically that you're born into, this case, a well-to-do family. A good neighbor means a better school, more free me time, better college application, more earning potential, and achieving that classic definition of success with all the toys in the yard, the big house, the 2.2 children, or whatever the average is nowadays. And if we apply this to our First Nations communities in Canada, the land and location of the places that our First Nations communities live in are often offer lower economic opportunities, and they don't have the amenities that often attract professionals to live and work there. So the income is lower, there's less funding for education, the quality of education because of that is lower. The lower income also means less opportunity for extracurricular activities and less opportunity for jobs. Because of this, those in First Nations community have a starting block that is very much in the rear view mirror of the more privileged. Now, because our mining industry occupies traditional First Nation land and the economic opportunity that mining industry or the mining presents, it's still often difficult for First Nations people to access that economic opportunity. And it could be the systemic or institutional bias that's present, or in hiring practices, or just in the interaction with, on site that can be blatant or subtle, that somebody isn't either hired for the job, or the uncomfortable environment that they're in doesn't allow for retention. And that applies to women as well when it comes to the working environment. Now, microaggressions, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about what microaggressions are, but basically they're the everyday, subtle, sometimes intentional, but often unintentional. They're the interactions and behaviors that communicate some sort of bias to historically marginalized groups. In most cases, however, a lot of people that are displaying these microaggressions are unaware of them. And that's where the heart of the problem is. The microaggressions are difficult for people to recognize and often difficult to speak up about. I myself have had a lot of difficulty speaking up about some of the things that I experience within industry and actually in personal life as well regarding microaggressions. And I'm going to go through some of the things that myself and others have heard in industry. Women don't want to do that. I'm getting some feedback from someone. She shouldn't be doing that. Or, hey there, beautiful. My favorite, wow, you really are smart. So there's often those backhanded compliments, or those unwanted protests of protection. When it comes to this one guy in particular greeted this woman, and every morning it was, hey there, beautiful. And she was like, I've got a name, call me by my name. And he's like, but you are beautiful. And she's like, the last thing I want to know is that you value what I look like more than what I contribute to the operation. And I've heard that from many women. I myself feel like that as well. We have names, please use them. Wow, you really are smart. People have actually said that to me, which is funny. It's, it kind of brings across that feeling that, okay, so are Indigenous women not typically smart in your opinion? Am I intellectually inferior? Because I will show you that I am not. So there's just subtle hints of that aggression or that bias that exists in saying things like this. She shouldn't be wearing that here. There was one example where a lady was actually in mine rescue, and they were on a break, very hot, hard exercise that they went through, and all the men pulled down their coveralls on the break, bare-chested, no big deal. And she pulled down her coveralls, wearing a tank top, and she was told after that she shouldn't be wearing that, that she should keep herself covered. And she was perfectly covered, more covered than the men were, definitely. And yet it was, she was actually pulled aside and talked to about that. The same lady was actually told that when she wanted to join Mine Rescue, that she had to pass the fitness test. And she was actually the first person ever to have to get put through the fitness test at the site, with the exception of actually going through the certification process. So it was a little eye-opening as to, you know, how people treated that person. Ladies don't swear. This is one of my favorites because it was actually said to me. First thing I said, well, was well, that's your first mistake. I ain't no effing lady, at which point the guy didn't talk to me for a long time, which I was okay with. And then there was another instance where a guy actually approached me much later on after knowing him for quite a while, and he said, you know, when I first met you, I didn't really think much of you. The language. I was like, yeah, but you speak that way. He's like, I know, but I was brought up in a day and age where women just didn't talk like that. I'm like, well, get used to it. He's like, I've gotten used to you. And he's like, and I really like you. I was like, well, thanks. I said, just don't judge a book by its cover, and don't have the same expectations that you don't have of yourself. All you have to do is be successful. To be successful is work hard, is also something that I've heard. It indicates that everyone can be Bill Gates, including minorities. And if you aren't successful in that term, you must be lazy or incompetent, or you simply need to work harder. Your culture or your sex is insignificant to who you are and your ability to contribute. So, you know, if I always say, if work effort determines, you know, the stereotypical standard of success, there should be millionaire women in Indigenous communities across Canada. Now, why are you here? This is a man's world. That is still brought up. I've had a lot of people say, well, you know, well, it is a man's world. Nobody wants to work in that. And it's interesting to hear that still, but in reality, it still is that man's world in the mining industry. There have been, I was talking to one lady, and she basically said she brought up several ideas, and they wouldn't go anywhere unless they were forwarded by somebody else who was not a minority and not a female. And she couldn't understand why the process that she was talking about was set up in a particular way. She passed those solutions up the food chain, no action was taken. So she approached that non-minority person and asked them to bring the idea forward. And that person brought it forward to the common supervisor that they shared, and the solution was actually moved forward with a short time later. Now, the man who brought it forward was white, and he was male. She was Indigenous and female, and it was something that she had brought up several times before. So there was definitely a feeling of unfairness there. Heard this quite a bit too. It's too bad the most qualified person doesn't get the job. There's a misconception that minorities receive special treatment in hiring processes because of their race or sex, or and the hiring quotas that are out there. And there's that indication in saying that because we are a minority, we are incompetent, and that we're only in the positions we are because of the race we are, or the sex that we are. But that's just simply not true. There might be equal opportunity drivers. However, if all that's saying is that if two people are of equal skill and ability, why shouldn't we look at being a more inclusive environment and not simply going with somebody that looks like us, right? It should be most qualified. And often I've heard people say, well, they hired her even though my friend was qualified. Well, more than likely, this person that they hired was more qualified for it. She's way too small to be on the team. This was said about a few ladies. Few ladies that I worked with in Diamonds in the Rough had heard it in the companies that they worked with. You know, size matters apparently in in the mining industry. But we're no longer an industry of 300-pound men chopping at the face with a pickaxe. Technology has advanced. You don't have to be the big brute to do that. And one of the ladies on our Diamonds in the Rough team in 2018 and 2019, she was maybe 140 pounds sopping wet. And I can tell you she had no problem hauling out a very large person out of the mine. She was very, very tough. Well, my sister-in-law as well, she worked in emergency response. She's 108 pounds soaking wet as well. And she became a firefighter and then also became a police officer. And she had to pass this exact same physical exam as the rest of the men. And my brother was also a police officer. He's about 240 pounds. And the two of them had to do the same physical fitness test, lift the same weights, all that kind of stuff. And she did exactly everything and passed and made it through the course just fine. Now, how come she's all on the team? Are you all taking a round out of her? This was actually said to someone and basically indicates that looks are the only reason that this person was brought onto the mine rescue team. And that's obviously the only thing she can offer. The great thing about this one was the person happened to be the captain of the team, and he promptly responded, like, basically, would you do that to your sister? To which the guy was very apologetic after. And this is probably one of the biggest as well, is the whole, you bring up this stuff that, oh, that was offensive, you know, and you try and talk about some of these microaggressions and you get the, oh, relax, you're just too sensitive, it was just a joke. Well, that's gaslighting. You're trying to make somebody doubt their sense of reality. And you think, well, maybe I am too sensitive, but what we really need to realize is, nope, that guy is just an a-hole. Free schooling must be nice. There is a misconception in Canada that all Indigenous people that are status First Nations get free schooling, don't pay taxes, and that's a very, very broad misconception that's held. I, for example, have paid taxes my whole life. I am a status First Nation, and I haven't received any free schooling. So I'd like to find out where that misconception is coming from. I've actually had this said to me, both in the industry and on a personal level, you don't look Indigenous, or hey there, Pocahontas. And Indigenous people don't look like Disney's Pocahontas, and the story behind Pocahontas is actually quite tragic, and I strongly encourage you to look that up. Stereotyping how somebody looks and referring to them with that term is just very disrespectful. And when in regards to you don't look Indigenous, it's like you have to have dark brown skin, long black hair, and accent to claim your culture. If you don't fit the stereotype of drunk, broke, or homeless, or uneducated, you must not be Indigenous. When people say they're Indigenous and don't look it, they're claiming it because they get afforded some type of privilege. But looking different or potentially having some other ethnic background, sometimes it basically it's saying that you can't completely claim your Indigenous side because you know, people don't see you that way. It implies a privilege when it comes to the taxes and schooling that doesn't necessarily exist either. Now, this is something that a lot of minorities have to deal with. Where are you from? Often it's trying to get at somebody's ethnicity without really asking that question. It's like, where are you from? Well, I'm from Canada. And when it comes to Indigenous people, sometimes it's like, well, what reserve are you from? I'm like, well, I don't live on a reserve. I live off reserve. I own a home in northern Saskatchewan, and I don't know why you're asking me that. I don't see color is another one. Come on, are you blind? If you don't see color, there's something wrong. Even people with color blindness just see a couple colors differently. So don't ignore and dismiss the hardships that are encountered by people of color by saying things like that. There's also this misconception that Indigenous people are predisposed to alcoholism, but your ethnicity has nothing to do with determine whether you'll have an alcohol problem or not. Race does not determine addiction. Speak English. That is something that really bothers me, especially in the mining industry in Saskatchewan, where in the northern communities, the first language for a lot of people there is not English. It is Dene, it is Cree, and there's a lot of people at the mine site that I previously worked at who basically would, on their off time during their breaks, would speak Dene to each other. And they were told more than once that when they're in the coffee room, they should, in front of other people, they should speak English because people want to know that they're not talking about them. I'm like, why don't you take the opportunity to try and learn a new language rather than telling somebody that they have to change their way of communicating? Now, inclusion and equity. This is where we really need to strive to achieve this in the mining industry. So when we look at inclusion, basically we're looking at all those verbal and nonverbal behaviors that basically show that we have acceptance and that those differences are actually wanted in the organization and they're celebrated there. When we look at equity, we're looking at fairness of treatment for women, men, racial differences, minorities of all kinds. That might include equal treatment or treatment that is different but considered an equivalent. A good example of that is people with ability issues. If somebody's in a wheelchair, for example, they need to have access to a building, so we put in a ramp for their wheelchair. We don't give them stairs like we give the rest of the people that are able to walk into a building. We give them a ramp. It makes this situation equivalent for accessing that building. Now, when it comes to inclusion and equity, there's a lot of things that we need to really look at. Some of our communication practices, even within the mining industry, if you look at a lot of mining companies, they're actually getting a lot better with authentic imagery, really posting on their websites and social media pictures of people of minorities. And that becomes very important because how can you strive to be somewhere, strive to set a goal and be in a position within the mining industry if you don't see people who look like you there? It's important for these companies to share the success stories of their inclusion, their diversity within the organization, and also acknowledge their past mistakes and their historical practices and how they've changed them. You want to make sure that they do tailored messages. In northern Saskatchewan, for example, making messages that are in the predominant language in those communities, so putting communications in Dene or Cree. We want to make sure that we have SMART targets and goals when it comes to that communication, and also make sure that there's that opportunity for two-way communication within the company. So feedback shouldn't just be that annual review with your boss where your boss tells you where you're good or you suck. It should be an opportunity continually for the employee to give feedback to their supervisor as well. There needs to be accountability. So there needs to be clear roles and responsibilities within organizations in regards to those equity strategies and policies. So the supervisor, what are you required to do? What are you accountable for? As management, what are you accountable for? What are the employees required to do based on the equity strategies and policies that are there? There needs to be, again, with that accountability, the facilitation of two-way dialogue, and it should be in, it shouldn't actually be reliant on the people in the frontline jobs actually approaching management. Management needs to actively seek out that two-way dialogue, because often it is intimidating to talk to people in a higher position than you are. There also needs to be accountability for training programs. When it comes to those training programs, we really should make sure that management is taking those training programs on respectful workplace and racial awareness, cultural awareness, and making sure that they put that to action. And then we need to make sure that there's resolution, facilitation, and support where there are incidents when it comes to sexism or racism or other discriminations that happen in the workplace. There also needs to be honest objectives. What do you actually want to achieve? What benefits do you believe you're going to deliver? What do the communities believe you can deliver? Actually gather that data. Don't just shoot from the hip or do what everyone else is doing. Be honest about what you're looking for and what is your motive behind it. You want to make sure that you always integrate that continuous improvement. So look at those best practices that are out there. Is that something that impacts our company? Make sure you get feedback from the employees, from the minorities that are in that company. Measure that and measure yourself over time. What is the feedback that we're getting from the people that are a visible minority, that are women? Let's see how we're progressing and have those honest conversations with them to see, okay, you know, where are we lacking? Where do you see that these diversity and inclusion programs that we have in place are lacking? What are the gaps and where do we need to improve? And then we need to track that over time to see how we're improving. Now, building relationships is also important. We need to make sure that there's that engagement and meaningful conversation at all levels within the company, and making sure that there is that open door policy with people in the upper echelons of the company, because again, it can be quite intimidating for people on the front lines to approach management. Now, when it comes to implementing this, we all need to be the change makers. There's easy ways to utilize all the information to increase that employee awareness, making sure that there's acceptance and inclusion in the workplace. But the biggest part is it needs to be done not because you have to. It needs to be done because you want to and you see the value in it. Having the training, like I said, making the management take the training first. Learn about those historical practices within your company. Be explicit about what is unacceptable when you're delivering that training as well. When it comes to employment practices, rotate those positions. Don't let the gopher always be the gopher. I'm sure women here have experienced, you know, you go into a meeting and there's no admin staff that's in there, so automatically they point to you, hey, do you mind taking the minutes? Well, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I take good minutes, so you're lost. I do take good minutes, but I'm kind of a little bit of a control freak there, but I hate being the one that has to do it all the time. And again, the senior management needs to mingle equally with all. It's not an expectation of the opposite gender or those frontline staff making a connection. As managers, we need to do that. And when it comes to those indicators of success, there needs to be more than just a number of women versus men employed, number of visible minorities versus, you know, the dominant culture or ethnicity in the workplace. It needs to be, okay, what's the representation of each in management? What's the evaluation of the operations by all genders and visible minorities? What are the comments that we're coming up with? What about the incidents that are happening when it comes to discrimination? And when it comes to the resolutions of those incidents, were they gender biased instigated, or were they racially instigated? And was the resolution, was it actually implemented, and was it validated? Did it actually work? That's often the thing that we often forget in any change process or corrective action process is, yeah, we'll say, okay, yeah, this is what we're going to do. Yeah, we've implemented it. But we rarely go back and check, did it actually work? Did it solve the problem? and that's important. And we need to make sure with all this that we don't see the people who don't look like us as our enemies. As a woman, I need my male counterparts to absolutely help. They have been one of my biggest champions. So that's, it's fantastic that I've had a lot of good support there. They are our allies, and as women, we need to recognize that as well. And as women, we also need to realize that just because we don't see a lot of women at the top doesn't mean that as women we're also competing for that one position, because at some point there are going to be boardrooms filled with women, and there's not going to be that that inequity there, or inequality. There will be a good representation of women throughout the industry, and we need to support each other. So as women, we need to be allies for each other. As men, we need to speak up. We need to self-reflect and look at, okay, am I biased here? Are there biases that I'm expressing that I need to really check and recognize and correct? And just because we've held a position before does not mean we can't change our mind. People learn, they grow, and there's a lot of it takes a lot to acknowledge where you've gone wrong in the past, and I think it's very beneficial when something like that has happened, that people actually express it, recognize where they've gone wrong, and really talk about how they've moved forward and made the difference, and really ask for that feedback as a person. Is there something that I've done, and be open to recognizing that it's constructive feedback. You're not getting carved to death. You ask for the feedback, and now you're getting it. Be humble and accept it. Now, when we look at what we've done, we need to measure that success. Have we done what we said we were going to do? Have we increased the awareness and knowledge base of our employees? What's the success of our mentorship program? What's the overall satisfaction of employees and surrounding communities with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? And what are the best practices in the industry, and are we meeting them? So this is where I'm going to give you guys a little bit in Diamonds in the Rough. We've got a few minutes left here that I'll go over, but our vision for Diamonds in the Rough, it was an organization that, just to give you a little bit of background, was an idea that myself and my co-founders had come up with in 2007. We always thought it'd be cool to have a female mine rescue team, because my mine rescue instructor at the time was just a huge supporter of women. He didn't care what sex you were, what race you were. If you were passionate about it and could do it, he wanted you on the team. And so we talked about it for years, and then finally in 2018 we gave birth to our little baby, Diamonds in the Rough. Now our vision is basically what you see here. We aim to empower future generations in the mining industry by fostering the development of women and youth. We will increase the acceptance and promotion of women in the industry across the globe to ensure it's diverse, inclusive, and sustainable. Now I'm going to show you a video here. My apologies, some of the sound on it is not the best, but you hopefully will hear the commentary on it. So.
Rescue team, and there was no hesitation. I whatever I could do to support, and if I could be a part of that, it was that was a no-brainer for me.
She and her team are looking to change the face of the mining industry. Mine rescuer Kari Lentowicz of Saskatchewan, a member of the all-female pan-Canadian Diamonds in the Rough mine rescue team, joins us on Canada Now.
So when people ask me how men can support women in mine rescue, I always tell them they need to have a questioning attitude. I'll ask them, think about how you interact with the other men on your crews. And I'll ask them, how do you interact with the other women on your crews? Is there a difference? And if there is, maybe be rethinking how you're interacting with both groups. And that's going to change the whole attitude of how who are interacting with men or women.
We walked out of there not just changing mine rescue in Canada and on a world stage, but we walked out of there with friendships that'll last a lifetime.
Yeah. Just couldn't do it without them. It's been a great journey. Yeah.
It was a great confidence boost. It was a great way to see just how women of the industry are such great leaders when given the chance.
But as far as changing the mining, that's not what has to be changed.
The attitude.
It's the attitude.
Or it is actually illegal for some countries who even participate in competition to have women working underground. It only became legal in Canada in the 1970s.
The world is ready to have more women in the industry. They are.
It was a confidence booster for me. That was a life-changing experience for me.
Way. It's helped me become stronger. It's helped me actually be confident in who I am. If anything, it's given me a backbone when standing up to people in the industry, being like, I don't have to change who I am. I can be who I am and still be successful. I don't have to be controlled by people and do what they want. And it was the diamonds that showed me that I can be who I am.
Thank you so much, and thanks again for the opportunity to share our experience.
For those of you who did hear the music, though, that song was actually written for us. There was a musician in Saskatchewan who was quite impressed by what we did, so he actually wrote a song and had this wonderful lady do the vocals on it, and we were just quite honored to have him do that for us. So we talked about measuring success. And so Diamonds in the Rough, have we done what we said we were going to do? Well, we've trained a lot of women in mine rescue and put them through competitions. In Russia in 2018, we competed against many other organizations or mining companies across the world. And out of those 25 teams, we came in 15th overall. In the underground portion, we actually came 5th out of 25th. In 2019, we placed 6th in nationals, and we got a 2nd in first aid. Have we increased the awareness and knowledge base of the employees? We've spoken to, gosh, well over 800 people in the field and in mining communities as well to raise awareness. We've got tons of social media followers on Facebook, Instagram, and on LinkedIn. We've shown that we've got that awareness out there. A lot of our mine rescue community has heard about us, and I just had a brief meeting last week with all-female team in Australia that's competing this week. So, or are they done? I can't remember. Yeah, I mean, it's been great to see that. What is the success of our program? I mean, once you get a chance to see the video and hear some of it better, the ladies in there, they express, increased confidence. They definitely have increased skills in mine rescue and their leadership abilities. They have an increased ability to lead in all aspects of their professional and personal lives, and they said they've gained the confidence to actually speak up when things are not going the way that they should in regards to diversity, inclusion, equity, and inequality. So the overall satisfaction of the people that we've worked with and that have met us and competed with us have basically, it's all been overwhelmingly positive. One of the best moments of feedback that we've had is that there was a few men that we talked to, one in particular from Australia, who basically said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell my daughter that she can do anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is like the best thing you could have ever said. And what are the best practices, and are we meeting them? We are the best practice, and we see people starting to step up and meet that as well. So I went a little bit longer than I had planned, but as you can tell, I like to talk. I'll step on to questions if anybody's got any here.
Yeah, well, listen, Carrie, it's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm absolutely blown away by all that you've been telling us. And I've got to give a bit of a shout out here because we've got Florence Drummond on the line, and she's actually the CEO and founder of Indigenous Women in Mining and Resources in Australia. And when she heard that you were talking today, we had actually said to Florence, listen, we're going to bring everybody back next year because we have to do another event, because I think it's really important that we bring all the Indigenous communities together to discuss the similarities, the challenges, and the opportunities. So questions, you've all been writing in your questions. Thank you so much. Let's start off with a very important one, because I know obviously, volunteering for a women in mining group, one of the conversations that we always have is, our male allies. So Martin asks, where are the allies in the mining industry? They must stand up and speak up. And those who have disabilities, including hidden, are also prejudiced in the sector. So yes, where are the allies? Again, I know from, Women in Mining UK, we want to showcase more of these allies, but where are they in Canada? Do you have, is it?
There are lots. There's lots. I had quite a few people who were champions for me, champions for Diamonds in the Rough. Our mine rescue coordinator for the province was a huge supporter of women in mine rescue. He loved the idea of having an all-female team. He kind of pushed it quite a bit, so he was very instrumental in us forming our nonprofit. There's several men in the industry that we couldn't do it without. A lot of support from a lot of companies out there that are male dominated as well, and they've shown their support in many ways, some of it financial, which we always appreciate. There's the little plug out there. you know, there's women in senior positions have been great allies as well. There's an organization I belong to as well. It's called Artemis, and it's kind of a collective of women in the mining industry that are basically they're self-employed. They have their own businesses, and it's been a great group of women to support women in mining as well. But I mean, the biggest group that we have are the male allies, so we really need them to speak up more. When it comes to race, I mean, they're everyone, right? Everyone can speak up for everyone else. So they are out there, and we just need to make sure that there's that open environment and that open dialogue, so that those discussions can happen, and they can bring forward those concerns.
So if you had a wish list of what we could change in the next 12 to 24 months, what would it be? How can we increase or encourage more discussion about the Indigenous communities in mining? I mean, let's face it, we all know after COP26, we have a huge potential for the industry. You know, the rush for critical minerals, mining is here to stay. And that means mining is going to be female. There are going to be more female representatives, you know, especially on the technology side. So if you had a wish list, what would you like to see change in the next 12 months to make it more inclusive?
I would really like to see the training change. I mean, everybody's got these push for diversity and inclusion, and they have this, you know, everybody's got their stereotypical packaged training on inclusion in the workplace and anti-harassment and all this stuff. But I have yet to see a good training program that actually talks about all those microaggressions, because those are the things that make it really uncomfortable for people in the workplace. And people often, they come to it from a place of innocence, not realizing that what they're saying is pretty offensive. So I'd really like to see that change, and I'd really like to see that two-way dialogue really open up a little bit more with senior management and the frontline people. So, and that two-way dialogue and that two-way feedback loop as well, like not just how am I doing as an individual employee, but how is the company doing? And really looking to grasp that data. Even if the data shows the company sucks right now, well, it's being open, it's recognizing that there's improvements that need to happen, and you know, let's put it out there and share that information as an industry, so we know which direction we need to go in. Like for me to find the number of the percentage of women in mining is quite difficult, and if you look, the numbers are all over the board. There's not a really good database that shows that you know, shows a really good number for how many women are in mining. Indigenous women in mining, I can't find a number, right? So those are numbers that would be tracked.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was a number, but if you can't find a number, then someone needs to go out and do that research and education and research. How do we get the young kids involved, the young girls involved?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've been doing for that is we've been actually talking in schools and stuff and talking about boys supporting girls and realizing that, you know, those stereotypical norms that we have there. A woman is not born to be a nurturer. That is something that is a gender norm. That's something that we learn over time based on, you know, how we're raised, the media that we see out there, and those expectations that people put on us. Because of that, we've become very good at nurturers, and we think differently, but we need to recognize that that's not, you know, the stereotypical role that we play, or we don't play that stereotypical role. There are women out there who don't want to be the minute takers, like myself. There are women out there who really don't want to have anything to do with children, you know. There's that stereotypical thing, and I've been told myself that, well, your life won't be complete unless you have children. I'm like, I love my fur babies, thank you, and I love being an auntie, and that's good for me. So yeah.
Well, listen, one more question. This is very sort of country specific. So, are there situations in the Saskatchewan mining industry where Indigenous males or females have filed or have had to file for discriminatory action, harassment claims on the basis of their race and or sex? Can you give us any examples?
Actually, I can give you a real good one. There was the individual himself did not file a claim, but one of his co-workers, white male, had heard one of the boss's kid actually talking about how he didn't like working with Indians, which is not an appropriate term for Indigenous people in Canada, and was talking specifically about how he'd like to get rid of him. And a short time later, found out this guy was held back during the morning toolbox meeting while everybody went out to their jobs. And when this guy came to surface later that day, he realized that the guy had been let go. So he went to the HR manager and was basically told, just keep it quiet. You don't need to bring it up. And, you know, you're just going to cause trouble for yourself. And he's like, no, I'm going to do what's right. So he spoke up. He filed a statement and everything. And he ended up with a target on his back. He ended up with a workplace injury at one point, and which required him to go for physiotherapy. And when he was down for physiotherapy, he needed to get his flights changed. And on one particular occasion, that the process was followed, but when he went to the airport, his flight wasn't booked. He was actually booked from his other destination point, and they let him on the plane anyway, because that other destination point they were going to be picking him up from anyway. And when he got to site, he was pulled into the office and basically let go. And he told them, well, you know, this was the process. I followed the process. And they said, well, no, the flight clerk didn't hear anything when he went to talk to the flight clerk. Indigenous woman basically said, well, you know what, I can't say anything. I just bought a new truck. There's no other employment opportunities for me. I don't want to have a target on my back. And she didn't speak up. But the good thing about it was the guy found a job 2 weeks later, and he's very good at what he does. He's got a good ethical background, and the guy that he spoke up for got his job back. So.
Oh my goodness, I just can't imagine the fear, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I mean, thanks for sharing this, Kari. I know we're conscious of the time, and it's very early for you, and lots of us are now going to go back out of our lunch break. But I'm going to say our goodbyes here. Thank you to you again for joining us this afternoon. Very early morning for you, and sharing your story. Just by way of an introduction, for those of you who don't know about Women in Mining UK, we're a volunteer-run non-profit organisation which promotes the employment, retention and progress of women in the mining industry. And of course, everyone is welcome to become a member of WIM UK, regardless of gender or where you are located in the world. So do go to our website. Membership is free. Our huge thanks to MinSouth for coming to us with this concept and idea of having this event today. And I know that we're going to be exploring more of this next year. So do follow both the organizations, because we'll definitely have some information on that next year. Thanks to Colin, thanks to Kari for joining us. I think we're going to say goodbye now. Love to hear your stories, and have a great rest of your day.